Hi team, you know what it is, we are back with another dose of that high strength spiritual bleach to burn through those common and persistent blockages on our path to awakening, our process of enlightenment. And we know that there are no real such blockages. These are just gaps in our understanding that are manifesting as an impediment to our deep, true understanding. Just a small gap in our knowledge, or perhaps just a thin veil or delusion of the mind that just, if believed in, can prevent us from that true depth of realization, the realization of truth, the realization of the reality of your true nature, your true being, the pure presence of awareness. Today's blockage that we are seeking to address is the problem of the very reasonable and very rational question of why. Why does infinite universal consciousness localize itself? Why would infinite universal consciousness temporarily forget its own nature and manifest as a seeming, apparent, temporary, finite, separate self? Why would infinite universal consciousness confine itself to a singular narrative, to the illusion of being one temporary, finite body and mind, subject to all the fragility and all the vulnerability, all the limitations and the mortality of a singular body and mind? Why would infinite universal consciousness do this? So just first up, like what is actually happening here? So you are not actually the individual that you have come to believe yourself to be. You are not the story of you. You are not the individual body and mind that you appear to be. You are the awareness of your individual body and mind. And sorry to be the one to break it to you if it's the first time you're hearing this, but I imagine if you've been following this channel and you're well versed in these sorts of matters that this isn't the first time you're hearing this. But if it is the first time you're hearing this, sorry to be the one to break it to you, but that thing that you were believing yourself to be, your name, your age, your height, your weight, your past, your future, your job, your relationships, all of that stuff, all of those things are an illusory appearance within the vast, infinite universal consciousness. And you are actually the consciousness that is aware of one individual body mind at this time. All that has happened is that infinite universal consciousness has temporarily overlooked its own nature in order to have the experience of being one singular individual person. Naturally, as we go through this process of awakening, we go through this process of enlightenment, we come to recognize, a vast amount of my suffering actually is tied up in the belief in being this individual. The suffering is actually contained within the narrative. And if the narrative is dropped, then the suffering drops also. This is what we find, and why we come to the understanding that, okay, so this narrative, this story, which in spiritual terminology is often referred to as the ego, which is what I'll be referring to it as moving forwards, we understand that the ego is the issue. Actually, all of this suffering, I'm not seeking, or the resolution to my suffering isn't in resolving the problems that are causing the suffering, but in resolving the root cause of the problem in the first place, which is the belief in the validity of the ego. The belief that this individual narrative is actually a real thing. That's the root cause of the vast majority, if not all, of our suffering. The belief in being a kind of biological body and brain and consciousness kind of arises within the brain. That belief, and it is a belief, by the way, that belief leads to our the horrifying and terrifying prospect of mortality. And there's a lot of background fear that is running all the time. So when we speak of awakening, we mean it literally. You are awakening from this dream. It is referred to as the dream of separation. And the dream of separation is actually the belief in your individual story, your individual ego, the belief in ego. That is the separation. You feel as though you are technically currently dreaming that you are separate from the entire universe, that you're somehow apart from it, that you're somehow kind of in it, but at the same time kind of outside of it. That is separation, and that is the dream of separation. And when we awaken, what is happening is that we awaken out of this delusion. We come to recognize how false this belief is and see it clearly for the delusion that it is. And we realize, what a relief. What a relief. This story that I've been telling myself is a nightmare. If you're in a nightmare, the solution is to wake up. The solution to the problems in the nightmare, let's say you're being chased by a monster in the nightmare, the solution isn't to get rid of the monster. The solution isn't to kill the monster. The solution isn't to run away or hide from the monster. Why? Because doing that actually reinforces the belief that this monster is a real threat, a terrible, awful threat, right? Awful, terrible. To try and fight it, to run and hide from it, we're only going to make it worse. The only solution is to wake up. Wake up and realize there was no monster. That's the relief. You know the relief you feel on waking up from a nightmare? I'm sure you've experienced it. What a relief. All of that, it wasn't real. Now, let's do a deep dive here. This is spiritual bleach. We are going into nuances. The relief you feel on waking up from a nightmare isn't because you have successfully defeated the monster. You don't go, what a relief, I vanquished the monster, or, oh, what a relief, I've successfully hid from the monster. The relief is felt by recognizing there is no monster. Monsters don't exist. They're not real. I'm so glad I woke up from that nightmare. That's the exact same relief felt upon awakening and upon enlightenment is, wow, I didn't find a way to resolve my problems. I recognized my problems were illusory. They weren't real. They never were. They never have been. What a relief. Now I can relax, rest, and enjoy this play unfolding. Now, many seekers who are on this path to trying to come to this recognition, and many understand this intellectually. We understand this, but I don't feel it. I still feel encased within a body and mind. I still feel identified with the narrative. And it does lead us to a very rational question of why? Why get involved in the nightmare? Why do it? Why does infinite universal consciousness do this in the first place? I mean, as it leads to so much suffering, which it does, as it leads to such terrible psychological turmoil and chaos, why would it do that? Why would it sacrifice its own peace? Why would it condense down into a singular, temporary, finite self? There was one comment, a very good comment actually, that said, why does this do this? Because it was a very honest comment, because the commenter said they feel a lot of resentment. They feel resentment about being here in the first place. And I thought it was a powerful comment, because it's so honest for one thing, and we have to practice self-honesty on this path if we want to really wake up. And it's very true, because I've felt that before myself, resenting it. I don't want to be here. Like, what? Why, if I'm infinite universal consciousness, why would I do this to myself? And why is it so hard to wake up? Surely it should just happen, shouldn't it? I want to answer that question today. As this, to quote the architect from the Matrix, whilst that question remains the most pertinent, it also remains the most irrelevant. It's ultimately quite a simple solution. There have been many proposed solutions, many proposed answers to this question. And one of them is, it has to do this in order to have in order to have experience at all. There has to be a subject and an object in order for there to be an experience. In order for there... It's almost like, you know, to get involved in a movie, if you're watching a movie, the best way to enjoy the movie is to become fully invested in it. To enjoy a movie is to forget that you're watching a movie, right? That's the sign of a good movie, is to be so invested in it, you forget you're watching a movie and become so invested in the characters, you feel genuine emotion, real, genuine emotion at what the characters are going through. Despite the fact that you know on a deep level this is all just a story, you're still feeling emotion as though these characters were real. We do this in our ordinary everyday experience, right? So because God is God and God can do anything, by God's own nature, by definition, one of the things God has to be able to do is forget itself. This is the power, the divine power. The Hindus see the model of reality as a kind of dramatic model of reality. So in that model, you purposefully became ultimately invested, because that is the only way to truly enjoy the play of reality. If you imagine you're an actor on a stage, the best actors get so invested in the role, they forget that they're acting and they are now fully immersed in the role, in the character, right? So God is the ultimate player, right? The ultimate actor who is now acting through you, utterly convinced. The best actor of all time, because you are so firmly convinced. I mean, you are the best actor that ever lived, because you are firmly convinced, no, I am this individual, I was born at a certain point, things are happening, and I'll die at a certain point, and nobody can tell me otherwise, because that is 100% the case. Well, curtain call, I'm afraid. Time to end the play, because the problem that's happened is you get so involved in the play, you are now suffering the problems that the character suffers from. And they're not real. So why are we still suffering? Why do we still do it? Well, so that's one proposed solution as to why, because infinite universal conscious kind of has to in order to play. But to me, and this is just, that might satisfy others, but to me, I couldn't quite get with that, because it doesn't feel kind of proportionate, if that makes sense. The game isn't worth the candle on that one, because I have suffered so intensely. I really have, so greatly, that I cannot imagine, if infinite universal consciousness is compassionate and ever-loving, which it is, always pure love. That's all. It's a disinterested, loving energy. Not even an energy. It's just love. I can't put it any other way. And if it is love, it wouldn't put itself through that. As illusory as it is, and as beautiful as the relief upon awakening is, it still doesn't quite make sense, because the suffering is so intense and so great, the game is not worth the candle. So, I meditated on this at length, because I kind of needed to get this one figured out. Why would I do this? And this is a separate question to why does suffering exist? We'll have to answer that one at another time. That's a big question in itself, and a big suffering in itself. But this is purely the question of why the ego? Why get involved? Why limit oneself? Why not just stay as the infinite universal consciousness and never get involved? So I meditated on this to get some answers and insights. And the one I arrived at And as often with these Kensho moments, it was hilarious when I got the joke, because the cosmic joke is a real knee slapper when you get it. Honestly, it'll knock your socks off. Why does it do this? Why did I choose to localize like this? Why did infinite universal consciousness choose to overlook its own nature and pretend to be a individual, temporary, finite, separate self? It doesn't. It doesn't. Infinite universal consciousness never once said you are individual, you are temporary, you are finite, you are separate. It never did this, not once. It has never done that. Consciousness itself does not inherently contain separation. It never did. It never did. It has never localized itself as a temporary, finite, separate self. It has never done this. You did that. You did that. Did you do it on purpose? Not really. You assumed it, is probably the best way of saying it, in a slightly less accusatory way. I'm aware that was quite accusatory, the way I said that. A slightly less accusatory way of saying it. You assumed. You have assumed that you are a temporary... You assumed it based on kind of your perception, but mostly based on what others told you. You were conditioned to believe this. You were conditioned to believe the biological story, the material story, or perhaps you were conditioned to believe a religious story of origin and all of this. You were conditioned to believe in the story of separation. But that never came from consciousness. Your conscious awareness, which is, let's just bring this back into basics here, just the awareness of being in the present moment now. The awareness of being in the present moment now does not contain anything to suggest separation. It doesn't... there is no information, internal or external, that suggests you are separate from the universe. That is something that you were taught. You have been conditioned and you went along with it because it kind of seems to fit what your perceptions are telling you, what your senses are telling you. But it's just one way of interpreting your sense perceptions. That's just one way of interpreting it. Now, the fact that every, like 99.99999% of people on the planet are kind of invested in this delusion, it is a delusion, and they all believe it, that's why it's so powerful. So that's why it feels almost inevitable that the dream of separation has to happen. But it's not coming from God. It is not coming from Brahman. It is not coming from infinite universal consciousness. It is not coming from the universe. It's coming from people. Separation is a product of people. Separation is something that humans did by eating of the tree of knowledge, really, right? To use that terminology, I don't mean that literally, kind of, in that when we became too invested in our own neocortex activity, that's when we created this model of separation. We did that. To quote Rorschach from the incredibly spiritual graphic novel Watchmen, Rorschach said, "God doesn't make the world this way. We do." It's a highly spiritual book. I suggest you check it out. We did this. We did this to ourselves. And now we're coming to understand, oh, I see. Because do you see how we often fall into that trap of blaming the powers that be, blaming the higher power? No, the truth is much more ground level, in the trenches, than that. We came up with this idea, but the idea of separation is actually something we created. It's not inherent, and it's not inevitable. It's not. If you think about indigenous tribes that have never had any contact or pre-contact with the civilized world, if such a thing exists, then they don't have this sense of separation. They feel they are connected with nature. Many of those, particularly the Aboriginal tribes in Australia, believe that this is the dream world. That reality is actually, so this is a kind of afterlife in itself. This is the dreamed world, and when forms end, when the individual form ends, we rejoin the truth, which is what happens essentially. But that's the answer to the question, and that is the spiritual bleach today that plugs the gap. You know, we have the gap in the wire. We just need to plug the gap and then the current can flow through, or turn the current up so high it arcs over the gap. That's it. It never did. Never. It doesn't do this. So stop fighting God, because God never did that. Stop fighting infinite universal consciousness, cursing infinite universal consciousness. This takes care of that resentment that we were feeling. And look, I can sympathize with that. I really can. I can sympathize, because I felt that too. It's like, why would I do this to myself? It wasn't until I realised that actually, the ego created the ego, and now puts a huge amount of energy into validating its own existence. Huge amount of energy. It now perpetuates itself, and so it's fighting itself on the way out as you're trying to awaken. Your own ego is trying to keep its job. It's what the ego does, right? It's fighting to keep its job. It doesn't want to be made redundant. So that's why it's so hard to let go of the ego. You're letting go of something that's fighting to hold on to you. Okay? The ego's just trying to keep its validity. And one of the ways that it does that is question, yeah, but I need to be here because God put me here. It's like, no, God never put the ego there. Infinite universal consciousness never intentionally fell into the belief in a separate self, in the belief in mortality. That's something you were told. You were told, you assumed, you went along with it. And at some point, if you're just radically self-honest with yourself, upon looking at the world, you start thinking, oh, I could have a bit of that. I can have some of that world. I can have that person over there. Oh, they're attractive. Oh, I could have a bit of that. And then, oh, I could have that material stuff, and I could have this status. And if I really cleverly create a persona, then I can change the way people perceive me. And the way people perceive me, that's going to be beneficial for me. I will get things. I will have status. I will have a good reputation. If I behave in a certain way, I will get better treatment if I just behave like this, and if I create this personality, if I create this personality, if I create this person, then I will get stuff from this world that I perceive, right? You did that. The universe didn't do that. So we have to come to understand that this person, this persona, which is Greek for through sound, if we leave that, if we drop this thing that we ourselves created and stop blaming the universe for creating it, the universe never created it. It never did. You did that. Drop it, rejoin the universe. Let us be rid of this dream of separation. Let us awaken from this nightmare. We must also understand most other beings will still be stuck in the nightmare. So if you take this teaching and try to talk to other people about it, let me tell you from experience, people don't want to hear it. It's mad. People don't want to hear that they don't exist. It's weird, that, isn't it? Why don't people want to hear they don't exist? Oh, God, funny that, isn't it? But just understand, if you try and... Often we are filled with so much self-doubt that when we have a true understanding in ourselves, we still need others to validate the understanding in order for us to believe that it's true. It's kind of what I'm doing right now, just to let you behind the curtain a little bit, you know. So we try to get others to understand, because then that will validate our own understanding. But it's not necessary. It's not a necessary step. Because if you try to explain to others, this one in particular, they ain't going to get it. And you will come face to face with the depth, the ferocity, the intensity of the delusion that most people are carrying. Because ultimately, I believe, ego is a kind of emotional trauma response, and people protect it fiercely, fiercely. So when you come to this understanding, just enjoy the fruit of that understanding. Yep. I think that's everything for today. Was there one more thing? Was there anything else I needed to talk about? I tried to keep this one as short as I could today. I know I waffle on some of infinite universal consciousness. Yeah, so the main takeaway here is that infinite universal consciousness does not limit itself. Just there's an element of this at some point in your awakening, right? You're going to come to this thing where all of this conceptualizing, all of this trying to understand, you're just watching even that from a distance, and you go, I'm fed up with this. Like a party that you have just suddenly realized you're not enjoying anymore. I am tired of the party. The best way to leave a party is out the back door. Don't tell anyone you're leaving, just go. Right? Done with it all. Rejoin the pure peace of the unmixed awareness. Just observe what is. You're still free to watch the play unfold, but now you're not nearly as invested in one single character. You still have half an eye on that character, that's fine, for a while, but just watch the play unfold and recognize, oh, I was watching a play the whole time. I was watching a movie. I just got very invested. Huh. What a great play. What a character that was. But now I'm relieved to be out of all that. That's everything I have for you today, team. Thank you so much for listening. Hope some of that has been helpful. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button on the way out. And channel memberships are available if you press one of these buttons down. I think it's down here. Channel memberships are available if you want to gain access to my exclusive guided meditations and talks, some of them based on Advaita, which is the most powerful, highest teaching possible. No birth, no change, no death. And by joining the channel membership, you gain access to the Discord chat rooms, a community of like-minded individuals who are committed to the process and the practices of awakening and healing. We have a great time in there, and we are sharing, learning, and enjoying this process together. We'd love to have you on board. Come and have a chat. That concludes this episode of Spiritual Bleach. Don't give up. You're doing well. You're nearly there. Really do it. Wake up, preferably now. Take care. Be well. And stay present.